The drums rose like thunder as the village gathered beneath the baobab. Zuri said, "I feel the spirits watching." Mama Ebele lifted the gourd of ancestors, and the wind shifted with a sharp hiss. Kato said, "Stay behind me if the sky turns." A crack tore the night when the heirloom calabash shattered in her hands. The shards bled light that crawled over Zuri's skin like living ink. Mama Ebele said, "The blessing arrives with a debt, child." A shadowed figure at the crowd's edge bowed and vanished. Zuri said, "Why do my bones remember a name I never learned?" The earth trembled and the drums faltered to silence. From the shards, a whisper named her guardian of a fate she did not choose. Silence clung to the baobab as shards dulled to stone. Zuri said, "If this is blessing, why does it sting like a wound?" Mama Ebele traced dirt with an old sigil. She said, "The ancients answer need, not comfort." Kato said, "Someone watched us from reeds." The crowd whispered, the name, the light spoke. Zuri said, "Guardian feels like a cage." Mama Ebele tied shard to her waist. She said, "A debt has opened." The tree hummed with a note only they heard. They followed the hum to a mud shrine. Mama Ebele said, "Your blood hid its light." Zuri touched the stone bowl, visions of ancestors crowding her mind. She said, "I see faces that wear my bones." Kato stood guard at the doorway. Mama Ebele said, "The first guardian broke promise, curse waited." Smoke rose, forming spear point. Zuri said, "Someone seeks this power beyond our safety." The hum faltered like a skipped heartbeat. At Market Square, rumors flew. A orator praised Chief Kunda's wealth. Kato said, "He buys marrow with silver words." Zuri said, "Blessings are not bargains." Mama Ebele said, "Thirst makes salt sweet." Courier announced relics stolen. Zuri said, "The shadow wore red gold sash." Kato marked Chief Kunda's name. At dusk, bats cut the sky. Mama Ebele said, "Training begins before fear rules." Zuri stood steady, breathing with tree rhythm. Kato said, "I will take blame if it comes." The shard glowed like coal. Zuri said, "If ancestors chose me, they must take my questions too." Mama Ebele smiled, drew ash circle. She said, "Stand in it, stand with many." Stars lit, night listened. The shrine's smoke clung to Zuri's hair as Mama Ebele laid a staff before her. Mama Ebele said, "A guardian learns through fire, not words." Zuri lifted the staff and felt her arms quake. She said, "Strength feels foreign to me." Kato said, "The staff bends with your will, not your muscle." Outside, children sang of heroes, their voices a haunting chorus. Mama Ebele said, "Each song is a map written by the ancients." Zuri shut her eyes, and visions swarmed, showing rivers, fires, and crowns lost in ash. She said, "The future feels heavier than the sky." The elder placed her hand on Zuri's shoulder and said, "Then learn to carry the sky before it falls." That night, Zuri dreamed of rivers turning to blood and stars flickering like dying embers. She said in the dream, "Why do the dead call my name?" Ancestral figures with hollow eyes reached for her, whispering in tongues. Mama Ebele's voice pierced the haze, saying, "Fear only what you do not honor." Zuri woke, gasping, the shard glowing against her waist. Kato rushed to her side and said, "Your body burned like flame, yet no fire touched you." She pressed the shard to her chest and said, "It feels alive." Mama Ebele said, "It is not alive, but it remembers." The air thickened with the scent of rain, though no clouds marked the sky. At sunrise, Kato sharpened his spear beside the baobab. He said, "Your enemies will not wait for visions." Zuri gripped the staff and swung, stumbling into dust. She said, "My body betrays me." Kato steadied her arms and said, "The body follows where the spirit leads." Mama Ebele said, "A guardian fights not to win, but to preserve." Children watched from distance, whispering. Zuri drew a deep breath, swung again, and the staff cracked against a stone, splitting it clean. She gasped. "I did not mean," Mama Ebele said, "intent bends to destiny." The villagers murmured, some in awe, others in fear. At the elder's hut, Mama Ebele traced lines on clay walls. She said, "Your ancestor chose silence, and silence bred curses." Zuri frowned and said, "Am I blamed for sins I never lived?" The elder said, "You inherit both wounds and strength." "Oh what?" Kato clenched his fists and said, "Her fight should be her own, not their burden." Mama Ebele sighed. "We do not choose the weight, only how to carry it." Zuri touched the clay symbols, which glowed faintly under her palm. She said, "They are burning inside me." Mama Ebele whispered, "Then let them light the path before you." Outside, a raven shrieked and flew north, a dark omen. As dusk fell, whispers spread that Chief Kunda's men moved closer. Kato said, "He tests the edge of our lands with hungry eyes." Mama Ebele said, "His thirst is older than his tongue." Zuri said, "Then he is the shadow that watched us." Villagers argued by the fires, some swayed by the chief's promises. Mama Ebele warned, "Gold blinds quicker than darkness." Zuri clenched the shard and said, "If the ancients chose me, I will not hide." Kato placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Then I walk with you into storm." The flames crackled as if agreeing, throwing sparks into the dark. Night settled heavy as Nia slipped into Chief Kunda's grand tent, the smell of burning resin clinging to the air. She said, "Zuri's name is sung as if she were born above us, and I will not live in her shadow." Kunda leaned back on cushions of red silk and said, "Shadows make room for kings, and kings reward loyal allies." Nia's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. She said, "I want her fate and the power of the shard that binds her." Kunda's smirk widened as he said, "Then betray her trust, and I will crown you in gold and iron." Nia's breath trembled, but her jaw hardened. She whispered, "Let my bloodline be the ladder I climb." Outside, the desert wind rattled the tent poles, sealing the bargain with a sound that felt like thunder caught in cloth. At dawn, Zuri sat beneath the baobab, the shard at her waist glowing faintly as if it breathed with her. She whispered, "Ancestors bind me to chains I cannot see, and each link weighs heavier than my own heart." Mama Ebele bent low, tracing circles in the dust, and said, "Chains are given so you may learn the strength to break them." Kato paced with restless energy and said, "Your enemies sharpen blades while you question your reflection." Zuri pressed her hand to her chest and said, "I feel the earth rise against me. I am not enough." Mama Ebele's eyes softened, and she said, "The river does not ask permission to flow. It moves, and so must you." Kato knelt and said, "Then I will guard the banks of this river until my bones are ash." The wind carried far-off chants, warnings that trouble approached. By midday, the village square seethed with voices sharp as blades. A young man shouted, "Why bow to dead gods when Chief Kunda brings iron roads and trade?" An elder slammed his staff and spat back, "Iron fills bellies with nothing. The ancestors feed us still." Zuri stepped forward, her heart hammering louder than the drums. She said, "I did not choose this burden, yet it chose me as surely as blood chooses the vein." Some bowed their heads in reverence, while others turned their faces away in contempt. Kato clenched his jaw and growled, "Her strength is not a story to be debated in smoke." Mama Ebele struck the earth with her staff and said, "Tradition breathes because we breathe. Forget it, and you kill yourself." Yet still whispers hissed through the crowd like snakes in dry grass, casting doubt upon Uri's rise. As twilight bled into night, Chief Kunda stood upon a wooden dais, his voice pouring like honey into eager ears. He said, "The past shackles you to dust, but I bring a dawn carved in iron and crowned in gold." The crowd roared, swaying as if enchanted by his words. Beside him, Nia raised her chin, her green wrap glinting in the torchlight, her face proud, yet shadowed with doubt. Zuri's name was twisted into ridicule, turned into a curse by the tongues of the crowd. Kato stood among them, muttering, "They drink lies as if it were sweet wine." Mama Ebele said softly, "Fruit that tastes too sweet rots quickest, and the rot spreads fast." Chief Kunda lifted his hand as torches blazed brighter, basking in cheers that echoed like war drums. That night, the shrine glowed with firelight. As Zuri knelt upon cold earth, sweat beading her brow, she said, "If destiny seeks to consume me, let it choke on my defiance." Mama Ebele placed wrinkled hands over her head and said, "Then speak to the ancestors with truth, not fear." Kato stood framed by the doorway, spear gleaming faintly, and said, "I will cut down betrayal before it reaches your skin." The fire pit roared suddenly, flames licking higher as if fanned by an unseen breath. Zuri whispered, "Guardian, warrior, cursed child, I will wear each name and still remain myself." The shrine trembled as the hum of spirits deepened, binding her bones with a vow older than stone. Outside, thunder cracked though the sky was clear, a warning carved into the silence of the night. The forest clearing was silent, except for cicadas, as Mama Ebele led Zuri into a circle of carved stones. She said, "Each guardian faces the trials of spirit. What breaks you also makes you whole." Zuri swallowed hard, clutching the shard at her waist. She whispered, "I fear failing those who already doubt me." Mama Ebele tapped her staff and said, "Fear is a mirror. Stare too long and you mistake it for truth." Kato stood just beyond the circle, spear ready, muttering, "If spirits test her, they test me too." The air shimmered as unseen hands stirred dust into glowing whirls. Zuri stepped into the circle, her skin prickling, and said, "Let the ancestors see me if they dare." The earth groaned, and the stones pulsed like beating hearts. Inside the circle, visions erupted like sparks. Flames leapt from nowhere, and Zuri found herself surrounded by warriors in bone masks. She gasped, "Are you my enemies or my ancestors?" A masked figure stepped forward, voice echoing, "We are both, child." Zuri raised her staff, trembling. She said, "I will not be a vessel of curses." The warriors surged, and the ground split beneath her feet. Mama Ebele's voice reached faintly, "The test is not theirs, it is yours." Zuri screamed, swung the staff, and the vision broke into shards of light. When the glow faded, she was kneeling, panting, hands glowing faintly as if dipped in fire. She whispered, "I carry their flame, not their chains." As Zuri collapsed, Kato rushed forward, but a spectral barrier blocked him. He slammed his spear against it and shouted, "She is not alone." Zuri staggered to her feet, staff burning in her grip. She said, "The fire does not burn, it teaches." A shadow rose from the ground, forming into a creature with hollow eyes. It hissed, "Guardian, you will be devoured as the first was devoured." Zuri steadied herself, raised the staff, and said, "I am not the first, I am the answer." She struck the ground, light erupted, and the shadow dissolved into mist. The barrier melted, and Kato caught her as she nearly fell. He said, "You are still breathing, and so are we." Later that night by the fire, Mama Ebele warned in a grave tone, "The blood that stands closest often carries the sharpest knife." Zuri frowned and said, "You speak of betrayal, yet my heart refuses to believe it." Kato clenched his fists and muttered, "I have seen envy in Nia's eyes. Love turned sideways becomes poison." Mama Ebele sighed. "Even love can be a tool of ruin if fed by hunger." Zuri pressed the shard to her chest and whispered, "If she turns, then my fight is against my own blood." The fire crackled as if agreeing, sparks rising like omens. Mama Ebele's eyes softened briefly, and she said, "Do not wait for betrayal. Prepare, for it always walks faster than you think." As the stars wheeled overhead, Nia's jealousy reached its breaking point. "Alone on a ridge," she whispered, "why her, and not me?" Her reflection in a shard of water shimmered into Chief Kunda's smiling face. His voice echoed, "Because she will falter, but you may rise if you push her." Nia's hands shook as she said, "If I betray her, I betray myself." Kunda's voice purred, "You betray nothing, you claim what was denied." Tears welled in her eyes, but her jaw hardened as she whispered, "Then let fate know I will take it." She turned from the water, her shadow long against the earth, stepping onto a path that would shatter bonds forever. The night cracked open with betrayal as Nia stood before Zuri, eyes burning with envy. Nia said, "All my life, I have watched you rise while I withered in shadow." Zuri's chest tightened, and she whispered, "You are my blood. Why cut me so deep?" Nia's jaw trembled, but her words were sharp. She said, "Blood is no gift when it is shackled to fate." Kato stepped forward, spear trembling with rage, and said, "I will end this treachery before it spreads." Mama Ebele raised her staff to stop him and said, "This is the storm we were warned of." The shard at Zura's waist pulsed, throwing blue light across the ground. Zuri's voice broke as she said, "If betrayal is my inheritance, then let me carry it to its end." By dawn, Chief Kunda's warriors stormed the village, torches blazing like a second sun. He shouted, "Bow to progress or burn with tradition." Zuri ran into the square, staff clutched tight. She cried, "You call this progress, but it is wrought in gold." Villagers screamed as huts caught fire. Kato fought like a lion, cutting through invaders. He shouted, "We will not surrender our breath to your greed." Mama Ebele stood in the chaos, chanting words older than stone. Flames recoiled from her, but her voice shook with strain. Nia watched from the shadows, torn, yet did not move to help. Zuri struck the earth, the shard flaring, pushing back warriors in a surge of blue fire. In the chaos, a blade flashed and struck towards Zuri's heart. Kato hurled himself forward, blocking the strike, his side torn open. He gasped, "I will not let you fall before destiny crowns you." Zuri caught him as he staggered, her voice breaking, "You were never meant to bleed for me." He smiled through pain and said, "My life was always yours to guard." Mama Ebele cried out, "The protector bleeds so the guardian may stand." Nia turned away, her hands trembling, whispering, "This was not the price I wanted." Chief Kunda laughed from the smoke, "Even your closest crumble under the weight of your curse." Zuri rose, tears in her eyes, and said, "I will not crumble. I will blaze." Amid the smoke, Mama Ebele stepped forward, staff blazing with ancestral fire. She shouted, "If destiny must take a life tonight, then let it be mine." She raised her staff, light spearing the sky, spirit swirling like a storm around her. Zuri cried, "No, your wisdom is still needed." Mama Ebele's eyes softened, and she said, "A teacher's duty is to guide, then to release." She struck her staff into the ground, and an explosion of light consumed the warriors. When the brilliance faded, Mama Ebele was gone, her staff lying in ash. Zuri fell to her knees, screaming, "Ebele!" The shard at her waist pulsed violently, burning her skin as if demanding she rise. Kunda staggered back, fear flickering in his eyes. The field lay silent, scorched and broken, Mama Ebele's absence heavy as a tomb. Zuri staggered to her feet, the shard blazing brighter than ever, veins glowing like molten rivers beneath her skin. She whispered, "You have taken much from me, but you will not take what remains." Nia stepped closer, tears streaking her cheeks, and said, "I never wished her death, only my chance." Zuri's voice trembled, "Your chance was never denied. It was poisoned by your envy." Kato groaned, clutching his wound, and said, "This is not the end, Zuri. It is the beginning." Chief Kunda raised his blade, voice cracking, "Then your beginning will be your grave." The night shook as thunder roared without rain. The morning sky was bruised with smoke as Zuri gathered those who had not yet fled. She stood beneath the ancient baobab, her chest rising and falling as if her lungs carried the weight of the village. She said, "We do not guard stones or huts, but the breath of our people, and breath is worth more than gold." Kato, bandaging his wound with strips of cloth, grimaced and said, "The cut means nothing. Command me, and I will move before even your shadow falls." Zuri's fingers brushed the shard at her waist, which pulsed with a rhythm that matched her heart. She said, "Mama Ebele's fire did not vanish. It waits in our ribs, demanding to be released. The elders exchanged uncertain glances until an old drummer stepped forward. He said, "Call to the ancestors, and thunder will answer." Zuri raised the staff, the air tightening as though the trees bent to listen. She said, "We march at dusk, and we do not look back, for the past will push us forward." A wind picked up, carrying ash and promise together like an oath whispered by the land itself. Away from the clearing, Nia crouched in the grass, her hands trembling as though they no longer belonged to her. She whispered, "I wanted a crown, yet I forged a chain that tightens with every breath." Chief Kunda's career emerged, face sharp as a blade. He said, "Return to the chief, and your place is certain." Nia shook her head and said, "Certainty tastes of dust when the tongue learns regret." The brush stirred, and Zuri's voice carried softly, "Bloodstains, but it also binds. You can still turn back toward us." Nia's jaw tightened, her voice raw. She said, "Your mercy stings worse than blame, for it forces me to see what I have become." Kato appeared behind her, steady and unyielding, and said, "We have no time for riddles. We march or we fall." Nia closed her eyes, tears streaking down her cheeks. She said, "Then hear my truth. Kunda binds spirits in iron masks, their cries caged in steel." Zuri stepped closer and said, "Bring me to the snare, and I will shatter it until their voices are free." By noon, the plain yawned wide like a wound, its soil scarred with blackened pits where iron totems pierced deep. Chief Kunda stood proudly at the center, arms outstretched. He said, "Behold the order that conquers chaos. Spirits that once defied us now bow in silence." Chains of smoke rose skyward, twisting into hollow-eyed masks that watched with unnatural stillness. Zuri gripped her staff tighter, her voice sharp with rage. She said, "Order without soul is nothing but a grave dug too wide." Kato planted his spear and said, "Graves have never held the stubborn, and they will not hold us." The masks turned, eyes glowing like embers, and Nia's breath hitched. She whispered, "They see me, they know my betrayal." Chief Kunda laughed, his voice clanging like iron on stone. He said, "Bow, and I will share the harvest. Resist, and you will be reaped with the dead." Zuri stepped forward, fire in her eyes. She said, "Harvest this. I sow breath, and breath cannot be chained." The plain trembled beneath their feet, as though bracing for storm without rain. The sky dimmed though no cloud passed, as if an unseen hand smothered the sun. Totems began to wail, the sound tearing through marrow. Zuri lifted the staff, voice steady. She said, "Ancestors, if breath remains in me, lend it shape strong enough to break these chains." The shard burst with light, glyphs running across her arms like rivers of dawn. Chief Kunda thrust his palm forward, veins bulging, and shouted, "Kneel, and I will spare your bones for my crown." Kato leapt to Zuri's side, planting his spear with both hands. He said, "Her bones are not yours to name." The iron mask spirits lunged, dragging winds that stank of nails and rain. Nia shouted, "Break the stakes, the chains die with them." Zuri slammed the staff into the soil, a ring of blue fire surging outward. The spirits reeled as their emptiness cracked like pottery struck by thunder. Kunda staggered, shielding his eyes, even as his fury mounted. The dust settled into silence, and Zuri stood in the circle of broken totems, her skin glowing with lines of fire that pulsed like veins of molten stone. She said, "I refused the crown of fear, and now I accept the mantle of service." The shard melted into her chest like a sunrise swallowed whole. Kato fell to one knee, bowing his head. He said, "Then the river has found its course, and I will guard its banks until my last breath." Nia dropped the stake she had broken, her shoulders shaking. She said, "I am not forgiven, but I am not lost either." Chief Kunda staggered, his robe torn, eyes wild with disbelief as the iron masks crumbled to ash. He spat, "You wear the power of gods, but you remain a mortal child." Zuri turned, her gaze steady as stone. She said, "I wear the will of my people, and that will is enough." A final crack echoed across the plain as the last totems split apart like dying thunder, leaving only silence and the smell of rain that never fell. Stormlight pooled over the ancestral ridge as drums answered distant thunder. Zuri said, "This is where the breath of our people turns into law." Chief Kunda strode forward, blade lifted like a red sunrise. He said, "Kneel, and I will pile your future in gold." Kato stepped to Zuri's flank and said, "Gold is soft against a spine that will not bend." Nia hovered between camps, grief carved into resolve. She said, "I will not watch silence win again." The shard heat rose through Zuri's ribs, steady as a vow. She said, "I carry flame to light, not to burn my own." Kunda laughed, sharp as iron, and called the last masked spirits. The ridge answered with a low hum, as if the earth itself took sides. The last iron masks drifted like vultures, dragging wind that smelled of rust. Zuri said, "Ancestors, if my hands are true, let them unbind what fear has tied." Kunda thrust the blade and said, "Truth bends to the loudest drum." Kato met the charge, steel ringing like struck stone. Nia ran past the edge and cried, "Break me before you break her." She drove a shattered stake into the nearest totem, splitting its core. The spirits buckled with a sound like glass, forgetting its shape. Zuri said, "I see the road you feared, cousin, and I will walk it with you." Nia gasped. "Then let this step be mine," and wrenched the stake free, shattering 2 more bonds. The ridge flashed as masks collapsed into ash. Kunda roared, "Power belongs to the hand that dares to close." Zuri advanced, each step ringing like a drumbeat. She said, "Power belongs to those who open the hand." Kato circled, drawing Kunda into uneven footing. He said, "Your crown has no roots here." Kunda lunged, but Zuri turned the blade with the staff and pressed her palm to his chest. She said, "Return what you stole." The shard's light flowed through him, dragging chains out like thorns. Kunda sagged, eyes wide, and whispered, "What am I without their fear?" Zuri answered, "A man who can choose again," and lowered him to the earth as the storm broke. When the rain gentled, villagers climbed the ridge carrying woven cloths and water. Zuri said, "We will mend with hands before we mend with words." Kato organized the wounded and said, "Strength stands taller when shared." Nia knelt among broken stakes and whispered, "I will count every hurt I caused and repay each one." An older woman answered, "Repayment begins with staying." Children gathered the ash of masks and scattered it in the fields. Zuri said, "Return them to the soil, so roots learn what chains forget." The ridge echoed with quiet work, the sound of a people teaching themselves to breathe again. Even the thunder kept its distance, as if listening. At blue hour, Zuri stood beneath the baobab where the first crack began. She said, "I have walked through names that were crowns and chains." Fireflies stitched slow constellations across the roots. Kato stopped at a respectful distance and said, "The river still needs its banks." Zuri smiled softly and said, "Then stand where the flood dreams and hold." A wind arose that smelled like rain on stone, and the leaves answered. Nia approached, head bowed. She said, "If you bid me leave, I will leave." Zuri touched her shoulder. She said, "Stay and learn the work that keeps breath from breaking." Painting. The night settled into a silence that felt like a hand lifted from a healed wound.